Fifth grade, that wasn't a tradition. This is it. So in the fifth grade, starting out the fifth grade, I picked up a trumpet. And so I picked up a trumpet and I actually joined the school band in fifth grade and started playing the trumpet a little bit. And I enjoyed it a little while, and so I practiced hard. And as the time came around towards Christmas, so we were working on as a band, we were working on, a little Christmas program, right, for all of our family and friends to come and hear us. And so, man, I worked really hard on mine, and I practiced a lot. Felt like I was doing real good. It was some Christmas songs, and I can't remember the exact song, but it was something like "Joy to the World" or something. That was, something we would sing in church. So I went to my dad and I said, "Hey, I've been practicing. I'm doing good. I want to play my song, in church." And he, not using good discretion, did not vet the process like he probably should have, and just let me do it. And so I got out and played my little thing, and everybody afterwards was telling me, "Oh, good job," except for one lady came and just and just an elderly lady, and just her. I probably wasn't trying to be malicious, but she just came and she said, "Now, what song was that supposed to be?" So I'll come back to that story, but Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile are back in the province and are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire." And so we come to this scene, and we're backtracking a little bit, and we're back, and we see this scene, and we look, and the report about Jerusalem that comes back from these guys is what? They are in great trouble and distress. So we would look at that and we would say things are not well, right? We say they come to great trouble and distress. So as we think about the process of things and what we've covered, a few weeks, a time back as we started this series, if we remember, Zerubbabel came onto the scene first, right? And had some things, and then a little bit later, Ezra came on board, and some things happened, and we talked about these things. But yet now here we sit, and from these third-party perspective, they come and they're just saying like things are terrible. And so we may easily go to the conclusion and say, well, Zerubbabel and Ezra must have failed, right? They must have failed. They must not have succeeded in what they were supposed to go and do because things are still a mess. And then from our worldly perspective, from our human eyes, sometimes we look at things like they saw things, and we're just like, things are in trouble and great distress. And we might conclude that, this was a failure, or that was a failure. This didn't happen like it was supposed to, and that didn't. And I want to contend this morning that we got to see things with different eyes. We got to see things with different eyes, because I don't believe at all that Zerubbabel or Ezra failed, even though we can look at it and maybe it kind of looks like it. You may even say, well, they were mildly successful. And I believe they were more than that even. Because what we know, and we see a lot in Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, we see this, that I'll just call it, it's a process. There's a process that has to happen a lot of times, and we see this throughout Scripture. Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians 3 in verses 6 through 9, where he's talking to the church there and explaining some disagreements and different things that they're looking at there. He says, I planted the seed. Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. So what he's describing here and what we see, that I'll just put a label on it, we'll call it the harvest process. Because you can look at it from the standpoint of a garden or sowing a field and any kind of crop like that and understand that a harvest just doesn't happen. There's a process for you to get fruit, for you to get the fruitfulness, for you to maximize that plot of land. There has to be a process that goes through. It's not just we just show up and there it is. There's corn one day. You show up and there's apples on, there's a process that has to happen for the fruitfulness to be like it should be. And at various points along that process, things may not look really good. But it doesn't mean that they aren't happening like they're supposed to. You look at Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the planter. You see, they had been exiled. They had come in, destroyed the city, the whole thing, scattered the Jews everywhere. They were nothing. They were just scattered. And so Zerubbabel is the first one that God charges to come in. He's the planter. The planter it's a tough job sometimes, right? You got to go in and maybe the dirt's real hard and you got to plow and break it up. Or if maybe you're doing this, or there's grass, there's weeds, there's things that you got to get down and dig up all the roots and do the stuff that's got to be. So Zerubbabel comes along and he's the planter. He's got to start from scratch. He's bringing people back in and bringing them back into the land from where they were scattered and breaking up the ground. And he's the one that had to get something started. You see, if you don't ever get something started, you're never going to have a harvest. If you never plant the seeds, you can sit around and watch that ground all day long and nothing's going to pop up. Nothing good. Nothing that you want. And so there has to be this process, the planter, and this is where Zerubbabel came in. He planted seed and did that. They rebuilt the temple. He was allowed to come in and rebuild the temple, and they began to establish the sacrifices again and celebrated the festivals again. And these were things that had to happen, needed to happen, but it was just the start. And so this is what he did. So he planted seeds, but if you look, there's still really no fruit. It's still a struggle. There's still things. They have the temple. They're able to start some of the worship process and do those things, but it is still, and there's no fruit. It's still a work in process. Then Ezra comes along. We'll call Ezra the water boy. He's the one maybe watering or feeding and doing the nutrients. He's doing the things there, and he comes in and he's the one that's now taking things kind of to another level. What was Ezra's purpose as he came in? He was an expert in the law. You see, they had got the temple rebuilt, and they were doing the big festivals and the main sacrifices, but they really weren't following the law because they didn't know. And so Ezra comes in now, and he begins to teach them the law. He's now beginning to establish some healthy and some righteous lifestyle to go along with their temple practice. Does that sound kind of familiar? It's what happens is in new believers' lives, right? We get the goods, right? But then there's this process. We got to learn to grow in righteousness. We can't expect someone walking here to give their life to Christ, and all of a sudden they're a saint. There's a process. And for one, I'm still in the process. So we're going through this process, and this is what Ezra's on the scene to do. To do the very careful and consistent watering, careful and consistent, persistent, giving it the nutrients, putting down some Miracle Grow, whatever, we got to do to feed and to nourish what's going on. And so this is what Ezra's doing here. And he comes to this place, and he's doing this. He's teaching them. They're establishing. They're dealing with some hard topics. I mean, they're working through some real stuff going through this. And so this is happening, and they're getting on board, and they're cleaning their lives up. But yet there's still no fruit. Why? Because it's still a work in progress. The process is still happening. It's still where now these friends of Nehemiah show up and they see this and they're like, well, that's, the temple's there and they're doing some things there, but it's still a mess. It's still a mess. And I think we can identify with that sometimes, right? And sometimes we hear the voices of the friends that just say, all they see is the mess. They see things in disrepair. But what we need to understand is to see, well, maybe so, but just hold on. God's still working. God's still working on this. Well, sometimes we hear those voices and we may tend to give up and be like, oh, it was all just a failure. Zerubbabel failed, Ezra failed, everything's a mess. Not understanding that if those things hadn't happened and got in place, we could never move forward. Nehemiah could never be Nehemiah. Nehemiah could never do what Nehemiah did if it wasn't for what Zerubbabel accomplished and it wasn't for what Ezra was doing. Nehemiah could have never did what he did. And so we look at these things and look at each of them and understand with Zerubbabel and with Ezra, each one had a purpose. As Paul said there, he said the planter has a purpose. The waterer has a purpose. Their purpose wasn't to rebuild the walls. Their purpose wasn't to bring the harvest. Zerubbabel's purpose was to rebuild the temple. He accomplished that. Ezra's purpose was to teach the people, to grow them, to teach and to train them. He was accomplishing that purpose. He had done a great thing in that. So now Nehemiah shows up on the scene. And here's what Nehemiah's job is. Nehemiah was the pruner. Nehemiah comes in and he's the pruner. He's the one trimming and doing. And he comes in and see what we hear about Nehemiah. Everything with Nehemiah, what we hear about what is rebuilding the walls, right? He's the rebuilder. He's doing all this. Let me tell you the bigger job that Nehemiah had. Nehemiah had to clean up all the debris. When Nehemiah shows up, remember, as he goes around at night trying to inspect the walls, there were places he had to get off his donkey because it was so bad, he had to climb. It was a mess. That area was a mess. And so I believe the bigger job Nehemiah actually had to do was the cleanup of the debris, of the old wall and the buildings. Everything that had been destroyed was still there. And so Nehemiah came in, and whether it's cleaning up debris, whether it's building a wall, he had to do some hard work. He had to do some things that was, getting rid of some old things, some messy things, and had to work through that and rebuild and to put some things together. And while he's doing this, Ezra's still on the scene. Ezra's still doing what he's doing. So a lot of times, in that pruning process, when we're doing the pruning process, that is uncomfortable but necessary. There's still watering going on, right? There's still feeding going on, and we see Ezra still on the scene there. As we'll see his name pop up a couple of more times. So Nehemiah comes on the scene, and this is what he's doing now. He's doing his part of now pruning and trimming, so that this can be all that it needs to be, all that God wants it to be. Because that's what we want, right? We want to be in this place and sitting like them and say, you know what, I was made for more. He wasn't content with just the way things were. Nehemiah's like, hey, you know what? I was made for more. This city was made for more. And we're going to build this and we're going to do this. And so part of that is this uncomfortable pruning and trimming process that we all got to go through. Now the thing of this story is, as we see this build up, because the harvest, we talk about this harvest process, the harvest result of what we see from Zerubbabel, Ezra, Nehemiah is Jesus. You understand that this all set the stage for Jesus to be born and to come to earth. Because the Jewish nation was done. They were scattered, they were done, they were no more. Until God began to plant seeds in Zerubbabel. And he began to water and feed it through Ezra, and he began to prune and process through Nehemiah, so that now a nation was reborn. The Jews began to come back more and more into Jerusalem, and temple was established, and their religion was reborn, and things began to happen that set the stage for Jesus now to be able to come, because his primary purpose was, according to the promise, to go after the Jews first. And if they're scattered everywhere, he couldn't do what he came to do. So all of this happened, but to lay the groundwork for Jesus. This is that harvest process. And this concept is true that we need to understand for things that we are working on. There may be people that we've got their name on that board, or they're on our hearts heavily, and we may feel frustration. We may look at their lives, and we may have the report of Hanani that says things are in trouble and a terrible mess. But what we may not see is that what God is doing underneath. That what we're doing, maybe we're just planting seeds. We want the result, right? We're just, and that's just our society is like, we want results and we want them now. We go through the drive-through, and if we have to wait 30 seconds, we're like pulling our hair out. What's going on in there? We want results and we want them now. So we go look at lives, and we're pouring into somebody's lives, and we're like, well, they should be on their knees right now giving their life to Christ. And what God's saying is, well, you know what? Maybe that's not your purpose. Your purpose may not be to see the harvest in their life. Your purpose may be to plant some seeds. You may be doing some of the tilling and some of the hard work to get something started like Zerubbabel did. Or maybe somebody's planted that seed and you're coming along, and maybe you're that one who's just walking with them and loving them and letting them see your lives, and it's feeding them. And there's growth going on. And let me tell you, there's a lot of growth and things that go on even before a plant pops up through the dirt. There's a lot of growth going on. And so sometimes we're looking and all we see is still dirt, and we just want to give up. And God's saying, I got you here for a purpose. That purpose may not be harvest, but you keep doing what you're doing so that someone next can come along and do some pruning so that someone else can come along and reap the harvest of what's happening here. And so whether it's an individual we're working on, let me tell you, sometimes we face this in ministries that we're doing, in things that we're going through. We look and we're expecting the final result. We want to see the fruit, the harvest. But maybe that's not your purpose. Maybe that's not where God has you at this moment. Maybe that thing that you're doing is planting a seed. Maybe that thing that you're doing, that ministry that you're trying to do, it may just be watering. It may just be feeding. Maybe you're the one coming in, and maybe you have to do some pruning. Maybe you're that one that does some of the difficult, the uncomfortable stuff, the stuff that makes the people want to run. Sometimes, but all this has to happen. This is part of that harvest process, that if it's not done right, it's tough. And let me tell you something. This is what, because of this process and because of the different purposes and the different places, this is why it is such a difficult thing when we try comparison. Because you will always fall short. If we compare ourselves as individuals, if we compare ourselves as a church to other churches, and because we may have a different purpose than that church. We may look at other churches and we may look down on them, but we don't know what God is using them for, what their purpose is. What is our purpose? There are things that's going on that we look at and see, and it may be not the results that we want, but we just need to say, God, what are we fulfilling our purpose? Are we Zerubbabel? If we're Zerubbabel and we don't see the city restored and we don't see that, does that mean we failed? Not at all. What does that mean? It means we did our purpose. And what did Paul say? He said each one will be rewarded for what their purpose was. Did they accomplish that purpose? That's the expectations that God has on us. We put different expectations on ourselves than others, but the expectation God has on us is, what did I design you for? What did I purpose you for? And if you fulfill that, let me tell you, there's a reward waiting. There's a well done, good and faithful servant. And you'll be like, well, things look like a mess. And he's like, not to me, they didn't. I saw what was rumbling under the ground because of what you did. I saw and then, we'll be able to see it one day. And so this is what we've got to understand. The things that we are involved in and the things that we do, we can't compare. We got to look, God, what is my purpose? What is our purpose? Are we fulfilling that? And make sure that we do. There's some of you that need to hear that. Let me tell you this. There's also some of you that need to hear this. This process works and is true even when we are the field. Even when we are the field. And that's what Paul said to them there. He told the people there, he's like, you are the field. You are God's field. And I'm not just talking about salvation. Yes, salvation is that thing, and we've been through that process where, God planted a seed in us and reached us. But now, even as believers, as followers of Christ, there are new things that God plants in us. We call those, we put names on those. We call those things like dreams. We call those things like visions that we have, burdens on our hearts. We call those things breakthroughs. Breakthroughs happen. And here's where my heart was just broken as I read through this and studied this, because I've seen so many people get a breakthrough. I've seen so many people get a dream and a vision and a start in their lives, and it never goes anywhere. Why is that the case? Because we don't allow ourselves to stay in the process. We get a dream and we think it's got to boom happen tomorrow. We get a vision and we're like, that thing needs to happen now, you know? We get breakthroughs in our lives and then we wonder why all of a sudden later on we find ourselves back in the same old pit. I thought I got a breakthrough. Well, because you let God plant a seed, but you never let anything else happen in your life. You never allowed yourself to go through the process. See, here's where church is so important. Here's where I'll tell you, people can say, oh, I don't have to go to church to be a Christian. Maybe. I'm going to tell you what, you ain't doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're not going to grow like you're supposed to grow. You're not going to be anything like you're not going to be all that you can be. I can guarantee you that because He designed us this way. And here's what we do. If we don't allow all of these people in our lives, if God plants a seed, He does a breakthrough in my life, He puts a vision or a dream in my life and something there, who's going to come along now? Who's the one that's coming along to water what God has done? Who's the one coming along nourishing in my life that seed and that plant so that it begins to grow? Then and say that happens, then who's the, you know what, here's where we really run away, is when the pruner comes along. The pruner comes along in our life. And what do? We are like the guy at the doctor's office, we're running. We're running, right? Oh, I don't want that. No, they hurt my feelings. I didn't like what they said. They told me the truth. And I don't like it. Or it's just uncomfortable. Maybe, they challenge us in ways and we're just like, I'm uncomfortable with that. And we push back and we don't realize that what's happening is God has put those people in our lives to prune us, to cut away things. Because what happens has to happen in the pruning process. There's things that cut away that hinder. They're hindering growth. There are dead things in our lives that got to be cut out. And God uses the church. God uses the church to do it. He sends us a Paul. He sends us an Apollos to do the various things. He sends us a Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah in our lives. And we got to be careful that we don't push away the process and not become all that God has for us to become, because we don't want to be pruned. Because we don't want that consistent, we don't want to have to endure, the just day after day of watering and day after day. Like I said, we want to rush to the end, and God says, I got to feed you. If I give you too much water or too much, it'll actually kill you. Just got to give you enough to grow, and a little bit at a time, and a little bit of food at a time. Just stay in the process. Just stay in the process. You're like, God, but I don't see anything happening. All I see is dirt. And He's like, yeah, but there's stuff rumbling underneath. And even when the green starts to pop up, we're like, that's great, but there's no fruit. God says, well, just let me keep watering. Let me keep that person in your life to keep nourishing you. Let me send someone along. There's some dead limbs over here. Let me trim those away. Sit still. Don't run away from them. Don't fight it. Let me do the process in your life. That's what He has for us to do. And the praise team, will y'all come up and help me for a minute? We've got to make ourselves available to the process. If we want to see the harvest, if we truly want to see God do all that He wants to do in our lives, what has to happen? We need the process. You see, if you don't do things in the right way and in the right order, you're not going to have a healthy plant. They have to happen in the right order and in the right way, or things aren't happening. Some of you may understand a different type of analogy better. Think if you're building a house. You know, I've gone into houses to see where they're being built. And you know, things like you can't go in after the sheetrock's up and then try to put in the electrical. If you don't do things in the right order, it's a mess, right? But if we do things in the right order, but you know, you've seen it, you can walk into a house that's in the process, and man, the plumbing may be done and perfected, and the electrical's all in, but you look and you're just like, this looks like a mess. It may look like a mess to the eye, but yet, man, the things are happening, right? The things are getting done and in place, and so that when it all comes together, it's something beautiful and amazing. So I'll take you back, and the praise team's going to help me here. So what I did not know in my young little early trumpeter life was that I was just part of a band. I was like the second part in the trumpet section. And so while that, you know, you may have thought I really did a bad job for that lady to say what she said. You know what? I played my part perfectly. Maybe not perfectly, but I played it very well. Okay, I did practice, and I knew my part, and I played it. But yet it was still kind of unrecognizable. The other people were just nice. So I'm going to have the praise team help me out of here. I think Matthew's going to start us off.
It's your turn, Ray.
What song are we doing? How can I help?
As each part played their part, especially if we hadn't done the song this morning, like you know, you probably would have heard Matthew, and you're just like, oh, what is that sound? Okay, it's good, but you know, and Nathan, I had no idea what Nathan was playing over there. I don't think any of us did, right? But he played his part right. He played his part right. And so this is the beauty, and this is the thing, that when all of these things come together, and why we as a church, all these people, we're all playing these different roles in these different parts. And if we do them well, but if we do them alone, it's lacking. It's lacking. In a lot of cases, it's unrecognizable. In other cases, it's still insufficient. Right? But when we all come together, everybody's doing their part. Everybody's doing it in the right timing, in the right order, coming in when they're supposed to come in, doing their part together. Yeah, but together. And this is what happens when we go through the process, when we allow God to work the process and put the right people in our lives, playing the right role, playing the right part. By itself, it may not be recognizable. You may not see what that person, how they're impacting your life. You know what I mean? I don't get it. What is going on there? And it's because it's like the base by itself. And others, you may be, well, I see what they're doing, but, it's just okay. But you know what? When God puts it all together, all of the people playing the different roles in our lives and in the ministries that we want to try to do, and then the people we're trying to reach, if we let God be God, do what He does, because He's the one that makes it happen. But we all do our parts and bring it all together. What God creates is something beautiful. So don't avoid the harvest process. Don't avoid it in the things you're trying to do. Don't avoid it in what God is trying to do in your life. Will you stand with me? What do we do with the harvest process? Number one is embrace it. Embrace the harvest process. Celebrate the people that are in your lives that are planting seeds, that are doing different things. Don't always like it, but celebrate it, because what you know is God is doing something. He's creating and developing something in you. He's taking you through the process, so we embrace it. And yes, there's an element of this too, that we just have to endure it. There's just a simple endurance to the process, that we just have to wait. I only get enough water for today. I only get enough food for today, and I got to wait and get it tomorrow and the next day and the next day, so that God can really grow me at the right pace and at the right speed. And then the people come along and prune, and it's got to just, you know what, you just got to just grit your teeth and bear it sometimes, and let God do what God needs to do, and cut out some of the dead things and the things that hinder in our lives, and allow people to do that. Embrace it, endure it, celebrate it all along the way, because what you know is that God's doing a good thing. He's doing a good thing in your life, and He is making you into all that you can be, to produce the fruit that He desires to produce in you. So as we go into the altar time, these altars are open for you to just talk to God, and you let Him just talk to you. He may begin to speak about people in your lives that maybe they were on your nerves, or maybe you didn't even think about them. But He's saying, you know what? There's your pruner. There's your water boy. There's the one who's helping to plant some seed. Here's the people that I've deliberately put in your life with a purpose in your life. He may begin to reveal some of those to you, and to see that maybe you need to draw closer to that person. But I just challenge you, whatever you can come to these altars, you do